just dropped over to Mum and Dad's to collect a few bits of furniture and give them a hand clearing whilst I have the van. But they're also busy helping to renovate the village hall, little tiny village, and there's a load of repair work to do. So we'll go over there, take a look at that whilst we're here. Okay. Empty beer bottles, that's a good start. A little bit of a backstory. This, the village is tiny, it's like 20 houses, and this is a little dinky village hall, but it's like the focal point really, and all the events happen here. But it's really suffering, I guess, from the building itself. It's an unheated building, and it's used about maybe 8 to 10 times a year, that's it. But by the looks of it, they're trying to do something about it. So if we start in this corner, we'll have a look. The village hall, I think probably a year after we moved here as a family, maybe 2001, 2002, it went through a bit of a renovation. And that was just a case of kind of the village coming together and for a few weekends painting it and making repairs needed. This is the renovation, 2002 it was. I'm probably on here somewhere. There I am. Back in the days when I had hair. At that point, this kind of plastic cladding went up. The whole place was painted. And that's kind of lasted okay, you know. It's had a good few years, but now it's looking tired again, and they want to get to the root of a lot of the problems rather than just covering them up. And that's how this has happened. So me and this channel are no stranger to this sort of scene. This is exactly what we went through in our renovation on the ground floor, suspended floors, getting down, making sure the ventilation was okay down there. We insulated between our joists, but there's a bit more of a problem here. So we've got is about 2 meters of this wall is retaining, or it's sub-ground level. So we've got soil banked up against this wall, possibly gravel, so it might not be that there's no drainage at all there, but certainly it's not going to be the driest of walls. And then in subsequent years, it's been rendered with cement, and as we know, that is a nightmare because everything gets trapped in the wall, nothing can breathe, condensation forms, and that's what they've been left with. So coming at this from my school of thought, from the limited stuff I've done, and the kind of purest route, I guess, would be to take it all back, to go back to the stonework and the lime mortar and let it breathe. You know, there's no moisture can be trapped in there if it's lime. No condensation will form, or at least if it does, it can't stay in the stonework. This is just holding it all there. But the place is only used so many times a year. It would be an awful mess and disruption for it to be all taken down and kind of shot blasted or whatever. So they're taking a slightly more modern route. Now, as you know, Dad's been on the channel a little bit before. He over-engineers everything just like me, and he's ripped out everything that was rotten, which is the right thing to do, obviously, and some of it was very rotten, and I'm surprised that the New Year's Eve parties haven't ended up with the dance floor falling through the floor. The actual boards are okay. So just like our house, we've got these nice big pine boards. I think they're kind of 7 inch by 1 inch, exactly the same as ours. And they'll be laying those back down. They seem to be okay, and there's no sign that the rot has come up into these. But where the joists originally came across and sat on this sill board here, that is obviously not healthy. And there's all sorts going on there, but this is very, very damp. You can feel it. So basically, there was pooling water here. So what Dad's done is put a new sill on here, and this sill is actually a composite, just in case there is moisture there, because it's always going to be a bit damp under here. So that will, you know, it's not going to rot, and that's what they'll sit the new timbers onto. They've just got exactly the same size joists. They're going to sister them to the other one, sit on the dwarf wall, and go across there. and the boards will go back down, and I think they've even got an event this weekend, so hopefully progress won't be halted much further. So I'm in two minds personally to what the problem was. It could be that this wall is just a lot colder. It's obviously unheated, but it's also against that earth the other side. It could just be condensation is forming and it's been dripping down over the length of time, and that's what's caused that rot. It could be that the stonework below is just completely saturated and it's rotted up into this stuff. But the school of thought that they're coming from, and the surveyor that they had around, is that the moisture was coming through the wall and it was just kind of forcing its way down and dripping down into there. So, you know, it's a minefield, damp, and the guy who came around here and quoted them 10 grand to sort it out may, you know, have a completely different reasoning than if you were to get someone from English heritage in here and talk about, you know, taking it back to how it was built and keeping it breathable. But, you know, that's a whole different video, a different story. Actually, another indication that supports my theory for some of this is that this wall here borders a house. The other side of this wall is the living room, and there's discoloration here, and there's kind of damp in the corner, or so-called damp. But this is all above ground, you know, there's someone's warm living room the other side of here. So this does support the theory that it is condensation, or some of it is condensation, because you can see that discoloration line along there, which might indicate that actually it's nothing to do with moisture coming through the wall, it's more condensation forming from the inside air on the wall and kind of can't go anywhere, it's being trapped there by that cement render. Which brings us to the question, what are they going to do and how are they going to solve it? I've already spoken about this sill. They're going to fix, well, they've fixed that and they've put a composite sill down. I guess that's going to help. You can see this line here is where the damp, condensation, whatever is forming. It's discoloured the paint, a non-breathable paint over a cement render. And that's what they need to sort. They want to cover it. So their damp expert that came in and quoted 10 grand recommended that they use the plastic sort of basement tanking, the egg box type shape stuff up against the wall with the correct fixings and plugs, and leave a ventilated space there, almost like we did in our dining room, if you remember that video with the panelling. Then they'll leave that free to vent down into the floor void and free at the top, just so there's no trapped moisture in there. And I guess it's a fairly sensible thing to do. They'll then build off with some metal stud work along here and almost kind of have a panelled wall. So it is a hotly debated topic, damp, and you either hit it with the modern techniques of tanking and you know, basically capping over the top of it, whether that's chemically damp proofing or chasing in damp proof membranes or whatever. Or you look at it and think, well, you know, 200 years ago when it was built, how was it built? It wasn't sopping wet when it was built. So you can kind of loop back and try and restore it. So we've done that route. Other people go this more modern route. And I think sometimes there's a compromise. You've got to do whatever suits your project. But, you know, if you have damp in your house at a subfloor level, this is pretty much what you've got to deal with. They found all sorts under here. There were roots, big roots growing through the wall. Obviously the cabling and all sorts under here. But there was one thing, which the first thing I asked, which is, did you find any vents? Any ventilation from outside is probably the most important thing under a suspended floor. There is one. There's a vent here. I am assured that it does go to outside, but you can't feel any draft. And the primary thing to do would be to clear that up completely. Make sure there is another one elsewhere so you can get some cross ventilation. The end gable is actually built up with soil, so it can't vent out that way. So I'm hoping that they have found vents elsewhere and there's a good airflow under here. This is if you've got a Victorian house, Edwardian house, older house, this is a pretty typical build-up. these are pretty small joists. They're only 5 inches, 4 inches actually, 100 mil. Sat on this plate, this timber plate, which is in turn sat on this little dwarf wall. So you've got an airflow coming through here. There's no airflow actually through the stone. Sometimes you get a gap. And obviously in modern houses you get a gap as well. So that's kind of how it happens. If you've got any joins on the joists, they usually overlap this bit here, which is what they'll do when they put the new ones in. They'll overlap and they'll probably just bolt to sister it to this bit. And that just makes sure that everything bears down onto this one. So this is kind of back to basics, but this is kind of what's probably under your floor if you've got a suspended floor. And then usually your last joist is just off the wall slightly. You know, you don't have any contact there. And that one runs across as well. And then everything will sit on the sill nearer the house. Sometimes they're pocketed into the stonework, sometimes they're on a little wall like this. Now, one way to tell if anything has actually been looked at before under your floor is anything like this mortar, this bed of mortar, or the pointing itself. If you can chip it away with your finger like this, and you can crumble it, then that is lime mortar. It's much softer and it's breathable. But that is also an indication that this is original. If that had been relaid at some point in the last 50, 60 years, this would probably be a cement mortar, and in which case it'd be very hard. You wouldn't be able to break it with your fingers, and it would also be non-breathable, which means that this timber would be much more likely to rot, and rot much quicker, because any moisture wouldn't be able to breathe away from it, and it wouldn't be kept dry. Lime basically keeps stuff dry. Same over here. This wall here, if you imagine from this section to the bottom, has never been touched since it was built. This is lime mortar. I can crumble it away. And these stones, although they're even lower than the main wall, are actually pretty dry. You know, I haven't got a moisture meter, but if you were to look at this and check it, you'd be able to tell if these were really damp, and they are pretty bone dry to touch. So the ventilation coming under the floor has kept that dry. The problem starts at this level, and everything here, there's no way I could chip that because that's an inch of cement render stuck on in the last few decades, and that is what's trapping all the moisture in this wall. And even if I touch these ones, they're much colder, they feel damp, even though they're higher up the wall. So sometimes you hear the rising damp term, and actually it isn't necessarily rising up, because, you know, here we're down at soil level or ground level. You know, you can feel that it's slightly damp, but it's not, you know, wicking moisture up like some people think. This is all pretty dry. It's only when you get to here, and we've messed around with it in the last generation or two, where we've trapped in the moisture. So, you know, it can't be rising damp if it's got dry stuff below it. A few years ago, they had a heating engineer in here because they wanted to sort out some heating. There's a couple of electric radiators you have to turn on about 3 days before you need to use the hall. So he was on about using, you know, LPG gas heaters in here and all sorts, space heaters. And I had always said, why don't you just get a really big log burner? The village is full of, you know, farms and rural properties. There's no shortage of wood. And obviously some other people have had that idea as well, because that's what they're doing. And Dad somehow thought that a 4-inch concrete slab was required, which is even insulated. So I'm not quite sure what they're expecting to put there, but it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. They just built a bit of block work here, and the joists are sat on there. And they're going to use some of the old slate from around the village, up in the churchyard and stuff, to kind of do the half. I don't think about what the calculation is for the space heat requirements. They're going to have to get something really big if they want to, you know, heat it up to a decent heat. To be quite honest, they're probably better off getting a slightly smaller stove, working it really hard for those small durations, rather than something slumbering away. But, you know, it might be that they have to get something like a 15 kilowatt and then just really flog it for the time that they're in here. To be honest, by the time you get 30, 40 people in here at an event, then the whole place warms up and it's not too bad anyway. Obviously, used to be a flue of sorts up here, so I don't know if they're going to take the same route and kind of duct it up and across, or whatever, but there is this sort of alcove here, which I imagine was possibly a fireplace before, but there was no hearth, so that's a bit of a mystery, that bit, but they're going to try and make a feature of that and stick it here, so when you walk in the door, it's straight in front of you. It really is confusing stuff, and it doesn't help when people start bashing around the term rising damp all the time. Anyway, that's a bit of a rant slash basic theory slash autopsy of a suspended floor. This little project here, or I say little project, it's going to be quite a nice project to do. They're going to get the wood burner in, run the flue up, and then obviously terminate it at a cowl at the top. That we'll try and document. I'm going to leave a camera with Dad, he's going to film some stuff. I'm going to drop over as and when they're doing bits, and we'll feature that install too. So let me know what you think. It's going to be an interesting one to follow and see the kind of technique, the tanking type membranes they're using. If you want to see how damp can be solved by using traditional building methods and respecting how the building was built, then one channel to look out for is a chap called Peter Ward. He's got a company that specialises in heritage, sort of old buildings, and I've learned a lot from his channel, and it's always interesting to see his approach to it. He normally follows up a damp surveyor who's been sent in by the mortgage company or whatever to basically prove them wrong, really. A lot of them stick their moisture meter in the wall, say it's damp, you're gonna have to, you know, start injecting stuff in your walls and all sorts. And then he's quite often brought in as a second opinion and says, no, really, all you need to do is chip back to the stone, give it 6 months to dry out, and then you've got a happy dry building. So that almost ties in with how I have approached our house. So if you want more detailed, qualified advice, head over to his channel, I'll link it below. If you enjoyed the video and you want to see more of other people's projects, renovations, restorations, and all of these sort of hurdles you come across in DIY self-builds and stuff, then let us know. I'd love to get involved in other people's projects, come around, make some episodes, and share them with you good people. But that's it, I'll drop back up and we'll come up and see this project when it's a little bit further along. But I think that's it. So remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll catch you next time.